Symploce. What is symploce? Symploce is the repetition of a word or set of words at the beginning of clauses with the repetition of a word or set of words at the end of clauses. If you have seen the previous videos, think of symploce this way. It is a combination of both anaphora and epistrophe. This is the easiest way to understand what symploce is. If you have not already seen these two videos, the one on anaphora and the one on epistrophe, go ahead and click on the link below in the description and view them first. It will make it much easier for you to understand what symploce is. The first example comes from a poem. For want of a nail the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe the horse was lost. For want of a horse the rider was lost. For want of a rider the battle was lost. For want of a battle the kingdom was lost. And all for the want of a horseshoe nail. If you take a look at this poem, look for repetitive phrases. You will find at the beginning you have this repetitive phrase, which is for want of a, and it repeats all the way down. Then if you look at the end of each sentence, you'll also find a repetitive phrase. It's the blank was lost. Every single line, every single sentence, that second word after the changes, but all the other phrases, the words are the same. The blank was lost. There is the first example of symploce. It is a repetition of words at the beginning of a clause and with the repetition of a word at the end of a clause. Example 2. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they of the seed of Abraham? So am I. This comes from 2 Corinthians 11, verse 22. If you take a look at it and think for a moment, what are the repetitive words and phrases, you'll find are they is the first repetitive phrase. It comes at the beginning of each sentence, each question in this case. If you look again, there's another repetitive set of words, and that is, so am I. Here, Paul is using symploce to emphasize a point. In order to identify symploce, first, we must look for at least two repetitive phrases. Then we must determine that one repetitive phrase comes at the beginning of a clause or sentence. Then we must determine that another repetitive phrase comes at the end of a clause or sentence. And if there are two repetitive phrases, one at the beginning of the clause and one at the end, then it is a symploce. Now, why do authors use symploce? Well, there are several functions for it. Number one, it has a heavy emphasis, much heavier than anaphora and epistrophe. If you look back at the example from Corinthians, he's trying to not only prove, but to emphasize his own identity as a Jew. And he uses 3 different words to describe it. Hebrews, Israelites, and the seed of Abraham. They all mean the same thing, but he's emphasizing them by saying, are they whatever? So am I. So am I. So am I. Then it also builds a strong focus in the listener. It gets rid of cognitive overload. By repeating the same phrases at the beginning of a sentence and then another phrase at the end of each sentence, it gets rid of the focus that we need for all the other words and focuses on the words that change. So if you remember in the poem, that second word in the epistrophe and the repetitive phrase at the end would change. The reason it changes is that's what the author wants the listener to focus on. Focus on those words. Those are the words that are important. Those are the words you need to focus on. And by doing that, the listeners or the readers do focus. So that's a second function of symploce. The third function is it's forceful. It gets your point across and it shows that you're strong. You come across to your listener or reader as strong by repeating the same phrases at the beginning and another phrase at the end of each sentence. So that way, the point that you want to make clear and get across, think of it this way, is getting hammered into the heads of the people that are listening to you. Example number 3. When there is talk of hatred, let us stand up and talk against it. When there's talk of violence, let us stand up and talk against it. First step is we look for a phrase at the beginning of each sentence or clause that is repeated. We have that here. It is when there is talk of. Then we look for a phrase that is repeated at the end of each sentence, and we also have that here. It's let us stand up and talk against it. And if you notice, the two words that are not colored are hatred and violence. To go back to why is Symploce used, what is the function? It's to emphasize a point to get you to focus on something. And in this case, it's hatred and violence. That's what we need to stand up and talk against. Those two things. And this is Bill Clinton speaking at a memorial service for the Oklahoma City bombing victims. This is a president. He gives a lot of speeches. In this case, it was a very serious one. And the point that he wants to make across and bring out with great force and to heavily emphasize and have everyone focus on is that when people talk in a hateful way, when they talk in a violent way, we have to stand up and talk against it. Otherwise, it may lead to a tragedy just like the one he was speaking at a memorial service for. Example number 4. Him would you pardon and acquit by your sentence, whom the Senate has condemned, whom the people of Rome have condemned, whom all men have condemned. This is a political speech, and not only a political speech, but a judicial one, meaning there is judgment being passed upon a certain individual. This means the speaker will probably want to be forceful and emphasize something very heavily and keep the focus of the Senate and the individuals on a specific point. And that point is that this individual has not only been condemned, but condemned by the Senate, that is the government, by Rome, that is the people of that government, and by all men for that matter. The repetitive anaphora, that's the first phrase at the beginning of a clause, is whom the, and the repetitive phrase at the end, the epistrophe, is has condemned. That leaves in focus for us the Senate, the people of Rome, and all men. So you're going from a very few number of people to everybody. Everybody between all and the few has condemned this person. So you can't let this person go. That is the argument. That is the emphasis here. Trivia. The word Symploce is a Greek word, which means weaving together. Because a word or phrase that reoccurs at the beginning of each clause is woven together with a word or phrase that reoccurs at the end of a clause. One last example. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. And it's also Paul, but this time from the first letter to the Corinthians. As you can see, he liked using Symploce for emphasis. The anaphora here, that's the first repetitive word, is I. It comes at the beginning of clauses. Then the repetitive phrase at the end is a child. So when I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. So he's looking at how he was, how he spoke, how he understood, how he thought. That's the focus. When I was a child, all these things were very different than when I became a man. Thanks for watching. Until next time.